Lead like Plato. Breathe. Now, I had a conversation recently with one of the young leaders that I meet with, and it followed up on a conversation some weeks earlier where he had described an intractable struggle going on in his community. A small group of people were kind of dominating the community's focus. Now, the topic of that focus wasn't so important, but it was a prominent theme in our national conversation, and this group was pretty insistently pulling the community's focus toward this galvanizing issue. And given their community's location and their resources, people, money, capacity resources, there wasn't really a lot they could do that would make a difference around this issue. They could join the chorus on social media, but yeah, we all know how much does that actually help. So my friend was thinking, even suggested to some folks, if we put our focus here instead of there, we could actually make a difference. Now, his is not a pushy personality, so when this group rejected his perspective and did so with a tone of moral superiority, suggesting that he was being complicit in human suffering, morally weak, well, he backed off. Now, as I'm telling you this story, I'm avoiding certain terms because them's fighting words. But if I were to use those terms, I might talk about virtue signaling or moral theater, but I'm not using those terms. But if you've been in part of a progressive spiritual community, it might be a pattern that you recognize. So now he and I are talking some weeks later since this previous conversation, and this time he's telling me a very different story. A few weeks before, he'd had some focused time, extended quiet and stillness, time for reflection. He didn't use Plato's language, of course, but this time of focus is what Plato calls harmony of the soul, harmonia psychēs, or internal order. Now, it was during that season of stillness, that time of reflection, that it occurred to him that there were a few simple strategies that he could try. Strategies, it turned out, that fundamentally changed the community dynamic. So here's what he started doing. First, he stopped being baited. He stopped participating in the well-known, well-rehearsed dance. Everybody has their talking points, and he stopped using his. He stopped participating in the back and forth. The second thing he began to do was to name the usually unnamed emotions going on under the surface. I notice the tension we're feeling, he says. I feel it, I bet you do too. The weight of our world going sideways and wanting to make a difference, wanting to be on the right side of history. I feel the pressure, maybe you do too. Anxiety that we're not making more of a difference. He didn't suggest any actions. He didn't validate or invalidate anything. He didn't blame anybody for anything. He just named feelings. And then the third thing he did was he invited folks to help him make an inventory of available resources. Let's write down, he said, what we have that we could apply to things that would make a difference. He got out a paper, he started a list, and he started putting down people with time and energy. He started putting down money, relational capital, and that's all he did. It wasn't a very grand plan. You can see they were very simple strategies, but they were strategies that came to him while he was being still. Now, here's what did not happen. A miracle. No. Everybody did not suddenly agree on everything. The tension did not magically go away. But what did happen, slowly, over time, more conversations began to happen about what we could do and fewer conversations about what others ought to do. More working together, more shared focus. Now, I tell you that story because there's a problem that every one of us face. We ourselves, even as we are reimagining and rebuilding our spiritual communities, we are also grappling with our own points of interior blindness, our own shadow illusions. So yeah, how is that supposed to work? When leaders themselves are rushed and scattered and reactive, we lose more than peace. We lose access to internal wisdom. Our world runs on action and doing and accomplishing, and consequently spaces that are not rushed, spaces that are not scattered, are few and far between. What my friend experienced, that was Plato right there. That's what harmonia psychēs means. That's what internal order means. Plato's basic premise is this: external harmony begins with internal order. External harmony begins with internal order. So let's talk about that. We live American lives, constant stimuli, overextended, pressured to respond and to react and to fix and to produce. Now that feels like our social moment. But Plato saw the same human dynamic almost 2,500 years ago. This is not a postmodern, social media, polarized society problem. This is a human problem. Again, external harmony is and always has been a function of internal order. Internal order shapes the reality that we create. Internal disorder does as well. Now, in the last episode, we named a problem, but we didn't fully develop it. Here's the idea: that truths that are not true enough will hold us back. We saw how that happens. Truths often get divorced from beauty and from goodness. Consequently, they are often not true enough. They come with glaring blind spots, often do more harm than help. I told you a long story. Well, here's how that works. We latch on to a truth. Here's one example. A truth like naming harm equals healing harm. Naming harm equals healing harm. Now, the thing is, that feels like a truth, doesn't it? If we give voice to harm and we make visible something that has been invisible, surely that begins the healing process. But we don't have to think very hard about this to see that naming, while it is a good start, does not repair. No, repair is an enormous task. Repair demands relational work and organizing work and ongoing work and comprehensive work. It is such an enormous task, repair, that enormity of it can easily overwhelm us. So, naming harm can become a shallow substitute for repair. Or worse, it can devolve into shaming or outgrouping or virtue signaling. Naming harm equals healing harm. It's not a malicious idea. It's just an incomplete idea. It's a truth, but it is not connected to the bigger picture that includes goodness and beauty, what we saw in the last episode. So as leaders, that's our job. Reconnect truths to goodness and beauty, which Plato tells us depends on our own soul's being in a state of harmonia psychēs, internal order. Our ability to turn from shadow to light, our ability to invite others to do the same, our ability to deepen our own moral imagination and practice patience over time and awaken relational intuition to be non-anxious presences, to live beauty and goodness. These demand harmonia psychēs, internal order. So, I bet you'll not be surprised, Plato and contemplative practice. Plato and consistent meditation. Plato and walking in nature and journaling and stillness and silence and deep listening and attending to the wisdom of our bodies. Plato and contemplative practice, harmonia psychēs. Now, you've heard that before, I imagine. Contemplation, the anchoring point of leadership. You've probably also heard before, start gently, even 5 minutes of stillness can help us. Today is simply reinforcing why contemplative practices are critical for us as spiritual leaders. To develop contemplative habits is critical if we're going to sustain over time the capacity to lead reimagined, rebuilding spiritual communities. We need habits that recenter us on internal order. Here's one simple practice, and I just tell you because it's so simple. Whenever my grandkids come over, if it's above 50 degrees, we walk together quietly in the woods near my house. It's simple, it's enjoyable, and consequently, it's repeatable. Practices like that are essential for spiritual leaders. Something that we can repeat again and again and again. Because without regularly recentering, we are as susceptible to distraction, to illusion, as everybody else. Without regularly recentering, we lose access to what is true and what is good and what is beautiful. Without regular recentering, we amplify blind spots instead of dismantling them. We harm when we think that we are helping. You've probably heard that as well, but it bears repeating. Stillness is strength. So let's lead from harmonia sukhas. Engage the simple, repeatable practices of stillness and recentering quiet. Okay, in the next episode, handling the turbulence. When leaving the cave ourselves and inviting others along, it is a bumpy ride. If you'd like to get notified when that goes live, go ahead and subscribe.